Now part of the Darkcast network. Welcome to Indie Podcasts with a dark side. Just before the clock struck 1990, in the early morning hours of December 31st, 1989, 11-year-old Collier Boyle was jolted awake in his Mansfield, Ohio home. He heard a scream, followed by two loud thuds coming from his mother Noreen's bedroom. The glow of his Batman clock said that the time was 3:17 a.m. Young Collier held his breath while asking himself a bunch of questions. Just then, heavy footsteps passed outside his bedroom door before fading into the night. Welcome, lambs. Welcome to Love and Murder, Heartbreak to Homicide. This is your weekly true crime podcast where I tell you cases of relationships that turned to murder. And we do each case while thinking of the victims, their families, and their friends. So you may hear some ranting and raving in my episode. I am your host, Kai, and I invite you to take a seat, take a listen all the way to the end, and if you like my retelling, then go ahead and subscribe. If you didn't know, you can also subscribe on the Patreon, patreon.com/Love and Murder. You can subscribe for free where you do get some benefits, but the best way to subscribe is by becoming part of the Lamb Fam. You choose one of our bonus tiers and you can become a voice of the victim yourself. You'll also get bonus episodes, case extras, and you'll get the new series that just dropped last month, Deadly Duos. I do have the first episode of Deadly Duos up there for free. So if you want to hear what that's about, then just visit the Patreon, patreon.com/Love and Murder. You could join for free and you can see what the Deadly Duos segment is all about. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. And now, without further ado, grab your butts, grab your delicious glass of apple juice, and let's get into today's Love and Murder. The next morning, Collier rushed to his mom's bedroom only to find it empty. He then went to his father, who was sitting calmly on the living room couch. John Boyle Jr. told him, quote, "Mommy went on a little vacation." But Collier knew his mother would never leave him or his younger sister Elizabeth without saying goodbye. John must have picked up on his doubt because he suddenly yelled at him, quote, "I never laid a finger on Mommy." And then he warned him not to call the police. I mean, that's kind of a weird warning. Actually, both him and his mother, Christine Boyle, Collier's grandmother, told him not to call the police, saying that he would be punished if he disobeyed. But Collier didn't listen. He waited until no one was around, then dug into his Garfield the cat stuffed animal where he'd hidden a list of his mother's closest friends and family. He started making calls one by one. And on January 2nd, 1990, one of those friends reported Noreen missing and a police investigation started. John Francis Boyle Jr., who went by Jack, was from Irish and Italian roots and was born on May 1st, 1943 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He grew up poor and went on to serve in the Navy, but even that may be a lie because apparently a lot of the stories he told about his military career, like claiming to be a fighter pilot or flight surgeon, actually that turned out to be a complete lie when people looked into it. Anyway, he met Noreen Marie Schmid when she was 16 and he was 19 at a drive-in diner. Noreen was from a working-class background and worked as a dental hygienist. She supported Jack through medical school at the University of Pennsylvania, where he specialized in osteopathy. The couple married and bounced around a bit before settling in Mansfield, Ohio in 1983. They shared 2 children, Collier, their biological son, and 3-year-old Elizabeth, who they had adopted from China. From the outside, it looked like they were living the dream, a successful doctor with a photogenic family that, quote, looked like they stepped from the pages of a magazine, and even included a wire fox terrier named Gowdy. Jack ran a thriving medical practice with, quote, about 1 in every 13 Richland County residents being his patients. He even took his son with him on house calls. Noreen was a stay-at-home mother and a socialite, quote, the light of people's lives. People loved her. She was warm, generous, and always trying to connect with others. While she sometimes embellished her past, claiming to have grown up in a mansion or held an MBA from Wharton, Collier remembered her as someone who, quote, really embodied, how can I connect with you? And taught him to genuinely care about others. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. John was described as, quote, a rageaholic with a, quote, Jekyll and Hyde personality. He was controlling and constantly abusive towards his family. Collier says that he was called a, quote, stupid little fat boy and, quote, the F word, F-A-G-G-O-T, by his own father. He also had a long string of affairs that Noreen quietly tolerated. Well, at least for a while, mostly because she didn't want her kids growing up in a broken home. That all started to fall apart in 1989. Collier was 11 when he met one of his father's mistresses, a 27-year-old woman named Sherry Lee Campbell. Not long after, he noticed Sherry wearing a very specific ring, his mom's custom-made diamond ring. Then he saw his dad kiss her. When his dad noticed that he saw that, John begged him, quote, I need you to do me a favor. Don't tell Mommy about Sherry. But Collier told her. And that was it. Noreen had had enough. She was furious. Not just about the cheating, but about him dragging her son into it. On November 17th, 1989, she filed for divorce, citing, quote, extreme mental cruelty and gross neglect. The divorce was messy. The divorce proceedings focused mainly on financial negotiations. Then, at one point in late November, Noreen turned to her son and told him, quote, Collier, I want you to know that if anything happens to me, your father had me killed. Even through all of this, John persuaded Noreen to give their marriage another try. And I mean, her main thing is she doesn't want her children to grow up in a broken home, so she gave it another try. He told her that they could have a fresh start in a new home. And on November 13th, 1989, he bought this gigantic new home in Erie, PA, and told her that he was going to move his medical practice over there. He told the realtor that he wanted to start living there by January 1st, 1990, with no exception. On December 4th, 1989, John asked the realtor, quote, what soil is under the basement floor? He told them that he wanted to lower it so that he and Collier could play basketball, which Collier just looked at his father because what basketball? He said him and his dad never played basketball. But of course, you don't say that in front of the adults. So he was just like, okay, basketball. Yeah, okay, Dad. Then on December 29th, just 2 days before Noreen's disappearance, John rented an electric jackhammer to supposedly break up ice on his property. Quote, he got it for the ice on the brick sidewalk of his local home because he was afraid his wife and children would slip and fall. Now, how many people have you ever known or ever met or ever heard of? And for the people who are not in states or countries or whatever with ice, but you've read books about snow and ice, how many books have you read where you heard that somebody needed a jackhammer to break up ice on their property? After Noreen's disappearance, kept saying that she'd gone on a trip. Collier said, quote, I knew right then that he had done something to her, but that, quote, they didn't believe me. It wasn't until Captain Dave Messmore came on the scene. He took me seriously. That's how we launched this whole investigation. Mansfield Police Lieutenant David Messmore took Collier seriously from the start. He said Collier was like a, quote, miniature adult and remembered, quote, how adamant that there was something really wrong. Collier started secretly helping Lieutenant Messmore, feeding him details whenever he could, including through secret meetings at Collier's elementary school, where, with the principal's permission, they would talk in empty classrooms. One of the biggest pieces he found were some pictures in his dad's truck of John with a visibly pregnant Sherry Campbell inside the Erie home. The picture didn't just look like they were, together as friends. You know how you're in a picture taking pictures with your friends or coworkers or something? That's not what it looked like. It looked like two people who were together, and that they had moved into the Erie home and they were already living there. That's what the picture looked like. Investigators started tracking John's purchases. They found that he had bought cement and they found the rental of the jackhammer. They were also able to trace chunks of concrete debris from the Erie house to a property belonging to Sherry's uncle, Mark Davis. On January 8th, John had a contractor install shelving in the basement where the contractor even told police that the basement windows were wide open at the time, which to him he said was kind of weird since it was freezing cold outside. On January 25th, 1990, 3 weeks after Noreen vanished, investigators finally executed a search warrant on the Erie home. This final push for getting a search warrant came when Collier contacted Detective Messmore saying that John had suggested he and Collier take a trip to Florida. This terrified the little boy, who thought, quote, "He's onto me. He knows something's up. He knows I've been talking to people." And he thought that he, quote, "might not make it back alive." This is why Detective Messmore moved faster. During the search, they found a section of fresh concrete beneath newly laid green carpet under some shelving. They pulled this up and started digging. Investigators brought in the jackhammer to break through the concrete patch, which measured approximately 36 inches by 76 inches. About 3 hours later, they found Noreen's body, wrapped in a blue tarp, secured with duct tape, with a plastic shopping bag tied over her head. She had on her Rolex with her initials on it, which was a gift from John several years ago. Along with the watch, investigators found Noreen still wearing her pink nightgown. Investigators noticed that her watch had stopped ticking on December 31st, confirming the time of her death. The Allegheny County coroner, Dr. Michael Sobel, used dental records to officially identify the body as Noreen Boyle. The autopsy report listed that 44-year-old Noreen had died from, quote, "blunt force trauma and suffocation." Asphyxiation was caused by the plastic bag secured around her head with duct tape. How horrible. Forensic evidence suggested Noreen had been struck with a hammer or similar object before being suffocated. The plastic bag, blue tarp, and duct tape were all traced back to supplies available at John's medical office. 46-year-old John was arrested and charged with aggravated murder and abuse of a corpse. He was held on a $5 million bond because the prosecution feared that he would flee. On June 4th, 1990, his trial started and lasted approximately 4 weeks. This trial at the time was called the, quote, "crime of the century." Every day the courtroom was packed with overflowing crowds watching it on TV in the lobby. So there was so many people in the courtroom that the courts had to put up TV. They specifically, it's not like they had TVs there before. They specifically had to put up TVs for everybody to be able to watch this trial. The prosecution, led by prosecutor James Mayer Jr., argued that John's actions were, quote, "meticulously contrived." He described John as a, quote, "healer by day, killer by night," and called him, quote, "diabolical," and probably the biggest liar I've ever seen. That's the other thing he called him. The case was built on circumstantial evidence, but there was a mountain of it. So according to U.S. law and some other countries' law, the amount of circumstantial evidence there is makes the court feel like it's an open and shut case, like it's very factual, even if you don't have physical evidence in front of you. So they brought forth some of this circumstantial evidence, like the rental of the jackhammer, the purchase of the concrete, and the green carpet. These were all bought just days before Noreen's murder. Police testified that John bought the house in Erie with a plan to kill his wife, bury her in the basement, and, quote, "walk on her for the rest of his life." They also discussed how Noreen's identity was confirmed, about the Rolex on her wrist, and the fact that there was no sign of forced entry. And they brought this up to negate a claim that someone had broken in and done this. They pointed out John's own lies about his background and his military history. This was to show that, John's credibility couldn't be trusted. Then the prosecution brought forth evidence of John's dealings with Sherry. He'd planned a New Year's roast with her, kind of like he knew Noreen wouldn't be around. Wow. Bold wow. They brought to the court that when John went to purchase his Erie home, Oh, I thought that was bold. When he went to purchase his Erie home, he brought Sherry with him and, as if that wasn't bad enough, introduced her as his wife, even calling her Sherry Boyle. Remember, her name was Sherry Campbell. It just keeps getting bolder and bolder and worse and worse. She even co-signed the mortgage. On November 13th, 1989, they signed a contract for a $299,000 home in Erie, PA. The purchase was completed on December 15th. As we all know, we've gone through this before, but now we're seeing it in a new light. So the purchase, along with Sherry, was completed on December 15th, just 2 weeks before Noreen vanished. Sherry forged Noreen's signature on the document as N. Sherry Boyle. Oh my God. How many people are in on this? I thought it was just bold with him planning a New Year's roast, but dude. Then Collier, at just 12 years old, took the stand and became the prosecution's most powerful witness. He calmly and articulately described hearing the scream and thuds on that night. He talked about his father's suspicious demeanor change, saying that he suddenly flipped from cold and distant to daddy perfect overnight. Quote, he was acting like daddy dearest and daddy perfect and so nice and stuff like that. He talked about the verbal abuse, the lies, the fear inflicted on him and his mother by John. He also said that his mom had given him the names and phone numbers of her friends, telling him, quote, if your father happens to say that I might have left, call all my friends and have them contact the police and have them investigate how I disappeared. That's when he put this inside of his stuffed Garfield. And he told the jury that if they let his father walk, his father would kill him in revenge. And finally, he ended in saying that he knew he had to take every opportunity to, move forth and do what he did to find his mom. Quote, I knew I was risking my life. I knew my father was dangerous and that he was violent, but I didn't care. I was going to find out what happened to my mother. It also came out that Noreen's last recorded statement was as she was speaking with a friend of hers December 30th, 1989, where she told that friend, quote, well, it looks like John isn't going to murder me tonight. His mother's staying over. Prosecutors ended saying that based on all this evidence, John was, quote, secretly plotting to get rid of Noreen so he can marry his pregnant 26-year-old mistress and install her at the Erie residence. Now the defense. John's attorneys, Robert Whitney and Charles Robinson, was stuck with a client they called, quote, difficult, claimed he was, quote, always right. He wouldn't take a plea deal, and he stuck to his story. Some random car showed up, Noreen walked outside, and just vanished. To which then I would be like, well, how did the body get there? To which he answered he, quote, didn't know how the body got in the basement. His defense claimed that, quote, someone else must have murdered her, broke into the home, tore out the basement carpeting and shelves, broke the cement floor, dug the grave, and buried Noreen, cemented over the hole, replaced the carpet and shelving, and removed the debris. What? I mean, what? That was he paid someone to... Moving on. The defense, I guess not really having a defense, floated around some wild theories. They said that she was involved in a baby selling ring, smuggled international gold jewelry, had what the frick are these people doing? I mean, I know I talk about the defense all the time, but damn! Anyways, had multiple affairs and was planning to torch the Erie mansion out of jealousy. So basically everything outside of her known personality. She was just about to do some un-Noreen stuff. Baby selling ring? And they were just grasping. Oh, maybe she was selling babies. Oh, no. Maybe, hear me out here, she was smuggling international gold jewelry. I think she had multiple affairs. And finally, Your Honor, she, after doing all of that, because, she's a huge everything else, I guess, but out of jealousy, she decided to torch the Erie mansion. Just say that you don't have a defense. It would have just been better for you to go up there and say, Your Honor, I don't know. I don't even know what to say. The defense rests, Your Honor. Like, that would have been better than all this word vomit you just, in front of national TV, in front of a court. Just what? Am I the only one who's baffled here? Let me know in the comments, because what? John's brother even testified that he'd seen Noreen alive at Dulles Airport after her disappearance. He said she was carrying a gun and somehow involved in a child abduction ring. So he was going along with that shit too. And I'm going to pause here real quick. If this were my brother, I'm not going to sit up there like a fool and lie. If I wasn't sure, because, it's circumstantial evidence, let's just be honest, then the best thing I could do for myself is to shut the F up. There's such a thing as shutting the F up. This is a sentiment like many people haven't grasped to this day, but maybe you should take a class in shutting the F up. Everything doesn't require for you to talk. I can't believe his brother went, oh, yeah, I saw her at the airport and she had a gun. And I think when she had that gun, that spelled child abduction ring to me. Because, anytime I see a person with a gun, I think child abduction ring. What the? Again, is it just me? Let me know in the comments. Then when all that, I don't mean to laugh, but this is so stupid. I'm laughing because it's just like, how did you just let this continue on in court? Then when all that didn't work, the defense tried to say that the body in the basement wasn't Noreen. And they based this on a misreported eye color in the coroner's report. You see, Your Honor, she had blue eyes and the report right here said that she had brown eyes. So even though she was wearing the watch, even though the watch literally had her initials on it, even though they did dental record tests and everything like that, the eye color, because, Your Honor, we all know here that medical examiners, when they type stuff, they cannot make a mistake. So this, Your Honor, is proof that that body in the basement was not Noreen. I rest my case. So they requested to have the body independently examined, but the judge said, no, go sit down and shut up. The court said that he had, quote, ample opportunity at trial to mount such an attack during cross-examination of the coroner. So when the coroner was up there and he was cross-examining him, they didn't even say anything about the eye color or anything. This was just something they pulled out their behinds later. Now, John eventually took the stand himself. He testified, get this, lambs, for 9 hours across 2 days, just wasting time. He denied everything, stuck to his story, and claimed that Noreen left in that mystery car after an argument where she had, quote, thrown a pile of credit cards at him. So apparently she left in that mystery card, threw all her money at him, and then buried herself in the basement. I guess that's his logic. I don't know. Finally, the trial was over and it was time for deliberation. After only 6 hours of deliberations on June 29th, 1990, the jury found John guilty and convicted him of aggravated murder and felony abuse of a corpse. He was then sentenced to, quote, life imprisonment for the murder with no possibility of parole for 20 years to run consecutively to an 18-month term for abuse of a corpse. His total sentence was 21 and a half years to life. On July 6, 1990, he was admitted to the Ohio prison system and also stripped of his medical license. Wow, they let him keep his license that long? I mean, I know he probably wasn't practicing, but they let him, I guess they were waiting for, a guilty verdict or whatever, because he could have come back innocent, then he could have kept his license. So, okay, I see. Now, John didn't take this sitting down. As we can see from the wild defense that went on, he wasn't going to take this sitting down. He has consistently tried to overturn his conviction and be released. After the trial, his team tried to argue that the prosecutor engaged in misconduct by introducing improper character evidence from 7 witnesses, improperly vouching for Collier's credibility. They can't vouch for Collier's credibility? Okay. I mean, I guess legally, yeah. And calling John a, quote, liar and a thief in front of the jury. They also claimed ineffective assistance of counsel, saying that John's lawyers didn't fight hard enough for him. The lawyers didn't object when they should have, and they let things slide. I mean, it seems like they had to have a lot of objections thrown at them. So I don't really think they were paying attention to the prosecution. And also, my argument would have been that my defense was complete shite. Just complete, utter. Did you hear what those lawyers said? That was what they claimed my defense was. Yes, shite. They said that the team had a generally passive defense. They had a generally ass defense, actually. But that was because, in my opinion, they didn't have a defense. There was no defense to be had. Like, she left in a car, but somehow ended up under the concrete in his new house. Like, what can you say to that? But I guess they said somebody else did it. Oh my God. I can't believe that. The courts did acknowledge that some of prosecutors Mayer's behaviors was, quote, unprofessional at best, and that the defense could have done more. They called their performance, quote, deficient. But in the end, none of that actually mattered. The court ruled these errors harmless, giving the, quote, overwhelming evidence of John's guilt. In June 1994, John filed a habeas corpus appeal claiming that there wasn't enough evidence to convict him and that there were errors during the trial. This was denied, and they again said that the evidence of his guilt was, quote, overwhelming. Stop asking us. But John said nope. In 1995, trying to push this theory that the body found in the basement wasn't actually Noreen's, John forced the courts to exhume her remains. DNA testing was done, and turns out that the body was Noreen's. That finally shut that down about the eye color being wrong on the coroner's report, which, as we well know, was just a human error, not a whole police force's conspiracy. Even after all of that, John still kept filing motions. He wanted more jail time credit. He claimed procedural missteps in sentencing, anything to chip away at his judgment. But none of it worked. Every attempt was denied, and the court stood by the original conviction every time. And yet, he kept running his mouth. For decades, John publicly denied killing Noreen. He stuck to his story that she walked out one night and never came back, except she did come back because she was under the concrete in your basement. John's also tried for parole multiple times. His first hearing was in 2010 and was denied. The board said releasing him would undermine justice and diminish the horror of what he did. His second attempt came in 2020 and he was denied again. That time the board cited, quote, extreme brutality, callousness, extended victimization, and said letting him out would be a threat to public safety. And I completely agree with this. This extended victimization, like, you're in prison. Every evidence pointed to you doing, stop, just stop. Now, while John's doing all of this and eating through his kids' money, because remember, somebody has to pay for the lawyers, and instead of just letting the kids live on the money, getting therapy because their whole lives have been freaking ruined, he's just eating through the money, saying that, oh no, she drove away in a car, but I don't know how she got under my floor in my basement. Remember, he has 3 kids now. So anyway, he's doing all of this. Let's turn to the kids. Collier's life was never the same after his mother's murder. He legally changed his last name to Landry and was left to navigate life alone. He wasn't just grieving his mother, he was basically an orphan. His younger sister Elizabeth was adopted by another family. But because Collier was a tween boy, he wasn't exactly considered what they would say, quote, a hot commodity in the foster system. Both sides of his family rejected him. His mother's side distanced themselves because he looked too much like his father, and his father's side turned their backs on him because he had testified against John. Actually, when his grandmother, Christine, figured out that he was the one to call police, she'd admonished him for doing so. And during the investigation, she tried to help John stop the police from talking to Collier. I don't understand how any of this makes sense, especially for the mother's side. You distance yourself from your family member's offspring because he looked too much like his father? And how is that his fault, what his face looks like? So you helped in the trauma. You helped in the trauma because he looked like his father. And looking at the pictures, if you want to see the pictures, go to the Patreon, patreon.com/11murder. That's part of the bonuses you get by being at least a $3 tier. But if you see the picture, he looks exactly like his father. But your mind can differentiate that. You can see this is Collier, and he's not his father. And then this is John, and he's John. Like, so you would just stop talking to your relative's offspring because of something they had no control over. Righty-o, righty F-N-O. Now, my other question is, would the grandmother be considered an accessory or something? The grandmother and Sherry, would they be considered an accessory? But then again, with Sherry, that doesn't necessarily mean she knew what he was going to do or even know, or even after it was done, knew that he did that. She could have just thought, he was cheating on his wife and buying her a house, and here you got to sign under her name, so no questions asked. Maybe that's what she thought. So what about the grandmother, though? Because the grandmother didn't want the police call. So to me, the grandmother knew something was going on. So would she be considered an accessory? But I didn't hear anything else of her. But that's just weird. After bouncing around briefly in foster care, including a short stay with the Messmore family, remember Lieutenant Messmore, he was eventually adopted by a kind couple, the Zeglers, who gave him a real home and extended family. But the damage had already run deep. Being the child of both a murderer and a murder victim left Collier with a fractured sense of identity. At school, he was bullied because, why? Why would they Okay. And he also had a constant sense of just being the, quote, Boyle kid. He later studied vocal performance at Ohio University, then packed up and moved 2,000 miles to Los Angeles to become a freelance cinematographer, mostly because it was a place where nobody knew his story. Even with all that trauma, Collier chose to face his past head-on. Instead of hiding from it, he used his voice to heal, to grow, and to help others do the same. In 2017, he released a documentary called A Murder in Mansfield, and it aired on ID Network in 2018. This included a face-to-face meeting with his father in prison. John, as expected, stuck to his story. But in that room in front of the cameras, Collier met him with a, quote, surprisingly genuine on-camera hug. Then in 2025, Collier started a podcast produced by Sony Music Entertainment called Finding Mom's Killer. While making the podcast, he reconnected with his father again after not talking to him for nearly a decade. The two now speak frequently by phone, but have not met in person since he last visited prison in 2015. And this was when he was making the documentary. So it came out later on, but he was making it in 2015. This recent conversation was a mix ranging from everything from John's love of the Philly Eagles and their last Super Bowl run to his parole plans to Collier trying to explain how text messages work. But underneath all that surface talk, Collier says one question still haunts him. What made his father snap? Quote, you had everything. A family, a thriving business. You effed everything up. Why? For what? You caused so much reciprocal damage to so many people. Not just me. Not just my mother. Not just you. There were so many ancillary characters, so much collateral damage from his violence. Then, out of nowhere, John admitted to killing Noreen. But he claimed it was an accident. Quote, Noreen's death will always remain a tragedy, and I'm the one responsible for that, accidental or otherwise. He said that during an argument, Noreen came at him with a knife. He pushed her, she fell, hit her head on the stool, and died. According to him, he panicked, put a plastic bag over her head because he felt guilty, loaded her body into the car, drove it to Erie. Quote, I dragged it over and put it in a hole, thinking it's going to disappear on its own, thinking if I covered it up, it would never be discovered, and I would never have to see it again or think about it. That was his story. So number one, you're still not taking accountability. Number 2, you still came up with a wild story. Noreen just randomly came at you with a knife. You pushed her, and she happened to hit her head on a stool and died. And then you panicked, but you're a doctor. And so in your panic and in your supposed guilt, you put a plastic bag over her head? How does any of this make sense so far? And then you loaded her body in the car and drove it to Erie and then dug a hole and put her in it, and that solved your guilt? And listen to how he's talking about it. Listen to how he's talking about the body. He didn't say Noreen. He didn't say my wife. He said, I dragged it over and put it in a hole, thinking it's going to disappear on its own, thinking if I covered it up, it would never be discovered, and I would never have to see it or think about it. Do you hear that speech? Lieutenant Messmore didn't believe one word of what John said, just like Kai doesn't believe it. He pointed out that this man was a doctor. Same thing I said. If it were really an accident, he would have tried to help her. Exactly. He didn't. Instead, he did all this. Well, he claimed to have done all this crazy crap because he was supposedly, scared and guilty. And it's like, that doesn't make sense. So he did all this and then he buried her. Like, what are you talking about? And Collier doesn't believe it was an accident either. But when it comes to his father's possible release from prison, he has mixed emotions. He asks, where would John even live? How would an 82-year-old man who hasn't touched a smartphone or opened a laptop in decades adjust to a world that's entirely digital now? Who's even going to hire a convicted murderer pushing 83? Quote, it's hard enough for anybody to get a job these days, let alone a convicted felon who's going to be 82 years old. John half joked that he could live in Collier's garage, and Collier immediately shut that shit down. He was like, no. But even with all of this, he says that he doesn't hate his father, and he's not entirely against his parole either. Quote, it's a lot for me to think about. I'm still trying to keep my own head above water. I'm still dealing with the lingering effects of this trauma and everything I've been through. What makes sense, what doesn't, what's fair. There are so many different nuances with all of this. Sometimes Collier wonders what life might have looked like if his mom had lived, if he'd grown up with two parents who were normal, loving, safe. Quote, my favorite quality about myself is I'm a genuinely nice and kind person. I'm just grateful that this tragedy didn't rob me of those things. As for podcasts talking about his mom's case, he doesn't listen to them. He said it's just too much. Too many dark memories he's spent years trying to keep from swallowing him whole. John is now 81 years old. His next parole hearing is set for October 1st, 2025. And as of those closest to the case are concerned, he doesn't deserve another day of freedom. Lieutenant Messmore said, quote, I'd like to see him stay in prison for the rest of his life. He's got no business being out here. And that is the case of how Noreen Boyle was murdered by her husband, John F. Boyle Jr. What did you think about this episode? I am still stuck on the defense. I am still stuck. I know I harp on defenses all the time, and I always say, like, if I knew this person was guilty, my defense would be shit. And this defense, look, they took me literally, and they just came in with crap. They were like, we know this guy's guilty, but we got to say a bunch of stuff, so we'll just say a bunch of stuff. I still can't get over that defense. And, for years you stuck to the story of she just drove away, and then finally on your son's podcast, you finally said you killed her, but it was an accident. And then the most asinine explanation on top of that. So in all these years, you've been in prison all these years, and you're still not taking accountability. So what did you learn? Where's the rehabilitation? You know what I'm saying? I guess he got one step closer to acceptance by saying he did kill her, but then took 10 steps back by saying it was an accident and making up another story. Anyways, y'all let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I cannot wait to hear what y'all have to say about this one. I do commend Collier with how he's dealing with all of it. And if you want to hear part of his podcast, I do have the link to that in the Patreon as part of the case extras. So if you join the Patreon, one of the things you get by being at the first tier, which is the $3 a month tier, is you do get the case extras. So you get the cases when they come out early, because the Lamb Fam does get the cases early. So you get the cases when they come out early. You do get case extras. So like this case has the pictures and a link to Collier's podcast, or one of his episodes where he's reading a letter from his dad. So you'll get to hear stuff like that for other episodes. You also get no ad break. So just the case straight up, and also no intro and no real, like all of this doesn't go into Patreon. So that's the kind of stuff that you get into Patreon if you started off at the $3 a month tier. If you start off at the $5 a month tier, not only do you get that, but you get bonus episodes at the $5, $10 tier. And then there's a $25 tier for anybody who just wants to, offer more support. That's about it. So on top of all of that, you do also get to be a voice of the victim along with me, and you help Love and Murder keep going. Patreon.com/Love and Murder. This was a wild case, and I can't wait to hear your comments. So go ahead and leave them, and they will be read out in a future episode. As usual, thank you for joining me. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening. And as I end every full episode, I want to remind you that it's, say it with me now, all love and no murder, y'all. Thank you so much for your continued support. Bye.